Hey, I'm Chelsea of Friday Pattern Company, and today we're doing the sew along for the Bernadette skirt. The Bernadette skirt is our newest sewing pattern, and it is a pleated skirt that you can make in a mini or a midi length, and then it comes with a belt that closes with D-rings, and then the belt has a little bag on it that has like a little zippered pocket and then a little flat pocket, and it goes onto the belt and you can carry your stuff around in it, and it's very cute. So we're gonna make both of those things in the video today. I'm making them out of this linen fabric, this like very groovy fabric. I'll link down below where it's from if you want it. I think it's pretty fun, and I have extra, so I might make like a matching top, and then I'll have like skirt, top, and belt, which is pretty crazy. So before you start the sew along, you'll want to take your measurements, choose your size, and then cut out your pattern pieces, and then we will cover all of the sewing steps in this video. So let's get started. Here I have my supplies all laid out. You're gonna need fusible interfacing, a 1/2 yard. I have my instructions printed, but you can also look at them on your phone. I've got the fabric for my skirt, and then you'll need a scrap for lining the bag. These are D-rings. You need 1 1/4 inch. This is the zipper for the bag, the belt bag, and this is a zipper foot. You'll need that. This is a invisible zipper, and I'm using a longer one, and I'm going to show you how to shorten that in case you don't have the exact size that is listed in the instructions. You'll need a button or some snaps for the belt bag, and I'm going to use snaps. And then we're ready to get started on the prep. So you're going to want to pre-wash your fabric and then pick out your size, make any modifications, and then you'll cut out your pieces. We'll start by sewing the skirt, and then we'll move on to the belt and the belt bag. The first step in our prep is to snip in at all notches. So notches are these little lines that are used as matching points or reference points on patterns, and you just snip in like 1/8 to 1/4 inch at each one. On the wrong side of front piece A, we'll mark our pleat placement. So I snipped down the legs of the pleats so that they could be folded back, and then I just placed that on the wrong side of the fabric, and I can draw in the little squares for my pleat placement. I'm using a little chocolate liner to mark them, and it's not the easiest thing to see on camera, but you can see it in person. And then you'll also want to make sure that you do both halves of front A, so you kind of have to flip the pattern piece. Similar to how we marked the pleats on the wrong side of front A, we are marking the dart placement on the wrong side of back B. So I just cut down the dart leg and folded it back, and then that gives me a nice little triangle that I can draw onto my fabric. And again, just make sure that you do this on both halves of back B. We'll add fusible interfacing to our waistband facing C pieces to just give it a little bit of extra body. If you're using a really heavy fabric, you could maybe skip this interfacing. So flip your piece so that the wrong side is facing up, and then you will put your fusible interfacing gluey side facing down, and then you just use a hot steamy iron to fuse the interfacing in place, and then you'll repeat that with both pieces. Our front, back, and facing pieces all need to be marked with the wearer's right and left. So you can hold the pieces up to your body and mark the side for left and right, as they are worn on your body. I realized that with the facing pieces, this is actually the opposite, because the right side of the facing is facing you once it's sewn in. But it doesn't matter because they're the same, and as long as you have a pair, then it'll be fine. But you're going to want to repeat this with also the front and back pieces to just make sure that they're clearly marked with the left and the right, because in the instructions we'll be referencing that a lot. So I'm just adding that in. Time to get started with step 1 of sewing. Grab your belt loop piece, E, and we're going to press it in half, wrong sides together, lengthwise. Now you're going to fold the raw edges of your belt loop piece in to meet that center crease and give it a press again. One more time, you will just fold it in half lengthwise, matching up the folded edges, and give it a good press. And then we'll take this over to the sewing machine and edge stitch all the way around the perimeter of this belt loop piece. A couple quick tips for sewing with little pieces like these belt loops. So I like to put a piece of paper under the fabric when I'm sewing something little to stop it from getting pulled down into the feed dogs when I start my seam. And another thing I do is I move the needle all the way over to one side when I'm trying to sew close to the edge of something, especially when I'm trying to sew close to the edge of a little piece. And then you're good to go. So you'll just edge stitch all the way around the perimeter of this belt loop piece. You could do 2 rows of like parallel edge stitching lines down the side, but I think it's easier to just sew down to the bottom of the belt loop and then lower your needle and lift your foot, pivot your piece, sew across the bottom, and then pivot it again to sew up the other side. And then you don't have to change, make a new seam or anything, just a little bit faster. And when you're done sewing, you can just rip the little scrap of paper away. You might have to pick out some like little paper pieces out of the seam, but it's easy. And here is that piece all sewn up. Now we are going to cut it into three 3-inch long pieces. So we'll have 3 belt loops. So I'm just marking it using a ruler and then I'll cut them. Now we're going to sew the darts, and I actually darkened this dart leg for you so you could see it better. To sew a dart, you match up the dart legs, and I am just matching them up starting at the point using a pin so that I can see that it's going through both and I'm aligning the dart legs perfectly. And you start at the point and go up towards the waist because that's the opposite of the direction you'll be sewing, so it'll be easier to remove the pins as you go. So that's just kind of my thought process here. So I'm just matching up the dart legs and pinning them in place, and then at the sewing machine I will start at the waist and sew down to the point. And there's a lot of ways to finish a dart leg. Some people like to backstitch down there. I like to just sew off the edge and let my machine run a few stitches on nothing, and it kind of pulls it into a tight coil that has never come undone for me. But you can finish them however you want, and you're going to sew both darts and then you'll press them towards the center back. Grab your 3 little belt loops and we will match them up on the waistband of the back of our skirt. So one matches up with center back and the other 2 match up with the notches that are on the waist of your back piece closer to the side seams. You can pin those in place, and then we'll take this to the sewing machine and we'll baste stitch them in place a 1/4 inch from the edge. And you can sew all the way across the waist of your back B. Just make sure that you're keeping your darts pressed in towards center back. Moving on to front A, we're going to sew our pleats in place now. So we'll just match up the pleat legs the same way we did with the darts. So you want these corners to match up. I'm using a pin to make sure that they're aligning and then just kind of pinning them in place. When you sew these pleats, you'll start at the waist and you'll sew down the leg, and then when you get to that corner, you pivot. You can lower your needle, lift up your presser foot and rotate your project, and then sew across into that fold, and then you want to backstitch at that fold. And you'll repeat that process for all 4 pleats. Once you have your pleats sewn, you'll press them in towards center front. So the pleats on the right press in towards the center, and then the pleats on the left press in towards the center. And then depending on the look that you want, you can press down the length of your pleats as well. It kind of will give you a more like crispy pleated look if you press all the way down. I went kind of part of the way down because I don't want this to be like a super like crispy pleated skirt, but I do want to give it a little bit more. So that's what I'm doing here. And then just like you did with the back, you're going to baste stitch across the waistline, basting all of the pleats in place, pressed towards center front. So one of the cool things about the Bernadette skirt is it only has exposed seams on the side seams. So those are the only ones we're going to need to finish. Because of that, I'm going to do a nice finish, and I'm going to add this bias binding. If you do an enclosed finish like that, you're going to want to make sure that you can still reference your notches on your side seam. So I'm just using a pen to extend the notch out on the wrong side so I can see where it is, even if that bias binding is sewn onto that side seam. For the next step, you're finishing the side seams on your front and back pieces, and you can do this any way you want. You could serge it, zigzag, or you could do what I did, which is to add some bias binding. I think it looks nice. Once it's like inside and pressed open, it just has like a really clean finish. We are going to pre-press the hems of our front A and back B pieces. So we will first press the hem edge under 3/8 of an inch, and then you'll go and press it under again another 1 inch. We pre-press hems because it just makes it a lot easier in the end to pin our hems in place really neatly. You can do this after your front and back pieces are sewn together, but then you'll be working with a circle and it's just a little bit more challenging. So that's why we like to pre-press hems. So you'll repeat that on both your front A and back B pieces, and then you'll unfold the pre-pressed hem. Now we will sew our front A to back B together along the wearer's right side. So with the fabric's right sides together, we'll match up the right side, and that's where our little marks come in handy. And we'll sew down the side using our 3/8 inch seam allowance, and make sure to unfold your pre-pressed hem as you sew this. Now we're sewing our waistband facing pieces together. So right sides together, we are sewing them on the wearer's right. So remember how we marked right and left earlier? That's where this comes in handy. So we're matching up our right sides, and we're going to just sew 3/8 of an inch from the edge and then press that seam open. Then we will press the lower unnotched edge of our waistband facing under 3/8 of an inch down the length of the waistband. So here's that finished, and this edge will be enclosed eventually, so we don't need to finish it. With right sides together, we're going to join our waistband to our skirt. So we'll just pin that down, matching up side seams and notches, and then you can stitch across the top using your 3/8 inch seam allowance. Make sure along the way that your darts, pleats, and belt loops all stay in place. Then we will press that seam allowance up towards the facing, and we will understitch it. So you'll sew with the right side of your skirt facing up, 1/8 from the seam that joins your skirt to your facing, and you're going to sew on the facing, catching the seam allowance underneath. That will stop the facing from rolling forward on your finished garment. Now we're getting ready to sew in our invisible zipper, but first we have to prep our zipper, and this involves our iron. We'll turn the volume, the heat, way down on our iron so that we don't burn or melt our zipper, and you want to make sure you give it time to cool off. What we're trying to do here is push the coil away from the tape of the zipper. So you'll unzip your zipper, and you can kind of see how on these invisible zippers the coil can kind of push away, and that's what we want to do. We want to just like give it a little bit of help with our iron. Once your iron has cooled down, you'll use the point of your iron to push that coil away and press down the lengths of both sides of your zipper. Now we're going to join the zipper to the side seam, and one of the challenges when sewing zippers is that they're kind of hard to hold in place because they're a little funky to pin, and you want them to be really secure as they pass under your zipper foot because you don't want them to move around. So you can pin, clip, you can hand sew to baste your zipper in place, which is another really good option. What I'm doing is using Wonder Tape, which is essentially like a two-sided tape that you can get at your local craft store or online. And that basically you can put down one side and then you pull up the tape, and then you can stick your zipper down and it'll hold it really nicely in place. So I'm adding that to the notch, and then with the right side of my front A facing up, I'm placing my zipper face down on that side seam. You just want to make sure that that is how your pieces are oriented. Once you've got your zipper oriented correctly, you can kind of just stick it in place. You want the teeth of the zipper, so there's like a little stop at the top of a zipper, and then there's also teeth, and you want that stopper to just be like a millimeter or two below your seam. The extra tape at the top of the zipper won't be sewn in the seam. We're going to start at that stop, and then we're going to sew down to the notch on the side seam of our skirt. If you have an invisible zipper foot, you can use that here, but I always sew my invisible zippers with a regular zipper foot, and it's worked out fine. So you're going to want to put that onto your sewing machine. And your zipper foot is going to push the coil away as you sew. So you want to get right in there so that your needle is going just behind it. You don't want to sew on it, or else that will make it so that your zipper doesn't work. So we're starting right at that stopper. We'll just sew down the length of the zipper until we get to the notch. And then when you get to the notch, you will back stitch. We'll repeat that step, the last two steps on the back B piece to join the other side of the zipper. And the trickiest part here is just making sure that you don't get your zipper like twisted up. So again, with the right side of your skirt facing up, you're going to lay your zipper face down. So if you need to re-zip your zipper to get oriented, do that. Get it lined up, and then you can pin, baste it in place however you did the other side. And then you'll sew from the top down to the notch again. And here is that joined up, and you can zip up your zipper to make sure everything is good. Now we'll fold the facing back over the zipper to finish that side seam up at the top. With right sides together, you're folding your facing back down over your side seam so that your zipper is sandwiched in the middle. You want that excess tape at the top of your zipper to be folded kind of out of the way towards the side. So just tuck that over and then pin your facing in place along the side seam, preserving the folded edge down at the bottom of your facing. You'll sew down the length of your facing and you'll back stitch at the end. You don't want to sew too close to your teeth in this step, or else it'll make it hard to use your zipper. You'll repeat that on both sides. So here that is sewn up, and then I'm just going to clip the corner, being careful not to clip into the seam, but it's okay if you take away some of that little excess zipper tape up there. And then you can pull your zipper right side out and kind of make sure everything is looking good on the zipper front. Now we're going to finish the side seam, but first, as promised, I'm going to show you how to shorten an invisible zipper. As long as your zipper is long enough, you can really use any length and shorten it, and it's a good thing to know how to do because in a pinch, you don't want to have to go pause your project and go all the way over to the store just to get like a zipper that's a couple inches shorter or something. So I'm just using embroidery floss here and sewing a few stitches about an inch below the notch to create a new stop for my zipper. You're just going to want to make sure that that is tied in place really securely, and then you can cut the zipper to your desired length. So now we will finish closing up our side seam. You want your front and back to be aligned, right sides together, obviously. And then we're going to sew a stitch the rest of the way down the side seam, and you want to get as close to your notch as possible, but you're not going to get like right there. So aim for about like, a quarter to a half inch below the notch, and you'll back stitch at the beginning of your seam, and then you'll sew down to the bottom using your 3/8 inch seam allowance. And then you'll press that seam open and it looks a little something like this. Now we are going to pin our facing in place. So we already have our pre-pressed edge, and we're going to edge stitch the facing in place. So you'll just use pins to pin your facing in place going around the waist of your skirt, and just make sure that you're not catching a pleat or a dart kind of crumpled up or folded in the wrong direction. And then you're going to take this over to your machine and you're going to sew with the facing side facing up towards you. You'll sew 1/8 of an inch from this folded edge going all the way around your waistband. And you're going to backstitch at the beginning and the end, which will be like at your zipper. Here's what that looks like finished, and it's coming together so cute. All that we have left is the belt loops and the hem, and then we move on to the belt and bag. Grab your iron and you're going to press the loose raw edge of your belt loops under 3/8 of an inch. Now we need to secure these folded edges in place, and again I'm using Wonder Tape. It's just so much easier when you're trying to pin something bulky and small to use the tape instead of a pin, just because it's hard to get a pin like to go into that at a good angle without like bending your pin or something like that. So I'm using Wonder Tape to secure these in place. And then you're going to sew these in place just by sewing about 1/8 of an inch from that folded edge. I'm just gonna sew using a straight stitch and back stitch a couple times. You could do a bar tack here or whatever works for your fabric and how much stress you think you're gonna be putting on the loops. So flip your skirt wrong side out, and then we will just go back to our pre-pressed hem. Hopefully you still have those creases preserved. If you don't, you can repress them, no big deal. But I'm just gonna go around the hem of my skirt and pin it in place, and then I will edge stitch around this hem, and then the skirt is done. Next step is to admire your adorable finished skirt, and then get ready to sew the belt and the bag. Let's get started with the belt bag prep. So we'll snip in at all notches. You probably remember this from the skirt prep, but you just snip in a 1/4 inch at each of these lines. Next, you're going to fuse interfacing onto the wrong side of both of your main fabric bag pieces and one of your flap pieces. So wrong side of your fabric facing up, and then the gluey side of the interfacing facing down, and you just use a hot iron to press that in place and melt the glue so those fuse together. Grab those main body pieces that you just interfaced, and we're going to mark one front and one back, and you can just write that on the wrong side. This is just for reference, it'll help us later. On the piece that you mark as back, you're going to measure in 1.5 inches from the sides and make a little snip. So you want to do this on the upper notched edge. So with that notched edge up, you'll grab your ruler and just measure in 1.5 inches and make a little mark, and then you can do that on the other side and then just snip in at those so you have them as reference points. You're going to mark the button or snap placement on your flap piece that you interfaced and also on your pocket piece. The mark will go on the right side of the fabric, so I just kind of line those up and fold the piece away so that I can make the mark on its spot. Also, if the fabric that you're using for your pocket is kind of thin, you might want to just add a little scrap of interfacing back behind the spot where you marked to place your button or snap. Cool, prep's done, so now we can start sewing the belt. You're going to grab your 2 belt D pieces and right sides together match up one of the short edges, and you'll just stitch them together using your 3/8 inch seam allowance and then press this seam open. Now we're going to press around the perimeter of our belt piece. So you're just going to fold the edges under 3/8 of an inch and press all the way around all 4 sides. Then you will fold the belt in half lengthwise, matching up those folded edges. And then you can take it to your machine and edge stitch all the way around, 1/8 of an inch from the edge, going all the way around all 4 edges. And here's what that will look like when you're done. So now all we have to do is attach the D-rings, and we do that by folding one end of the belt over around 2 of your D-rings, and you just want to fold it like 1 inch, and then you will sew up and down the length of your belt. You're going to want to backstitch here to make sure it's secure, and that's it. You got a belt. So now we're going to prep our bag loops. These are the little loops at the top of our bag that slide onto our belt. So you're going to fold them in half, wrong sides together lengthwise, and give it a press. Then you'll use that crease to fold the raw edges in and meet that crease. Give it a press again, and then you'll fold it in half and edge stitch along that folded edge, and you'll repeat with both belts. Grab your body piece that you marked as back, and that should have those 2 little marks at the top, 1.5 inches in, and those are where you're going to place your bag loops. So you'll fold your bag loops in half with the raw edges matched up, and then you're going to center them over those notches. And then you will baste those in place just 1/4 of an inch from that top edge. Now we prep the pocket, so grab your pocket piece and you'll fold that top edge under 3/8 of an inch, press it, and then fold it under another 3/8 of an inch and give it another press, and then we can edge stitch that folded edge in place. Then you're going to pin the pocket in place on the front of your bag, so the piece that you have marked front, the notches at the top, and you're going to have both your front piece and your pocket facing up facing you. And then you'll align your pocket with the bottom, so the unnotched edge along those 3 edges, and then you're going to baste it in place around the edges using a 1/4 inch seam allowance. Now you'll prep the flap. So we'll do that by pinning our flap pieces right sides together, and you'll sew using your 3/8 inch seam allowance around the outer curved edge. You don't sew across the top in this step because we're going to turn it right side out. With this flap, you're sewing around 2 curved edges that you'll see at the same time. So if they're not symmetrical, you kind of notice it. And something that I find helpful with things like this is to mark the seam line. So I'm just marking 3/8 of an inch in, going around the curves, because that's where precision is going to matter. So this is optional, but it just gives you a little bit more of a guide when sewing. And then you can go through and kind of draw a line to connect them and create that smooth curve. Now we are going to notch this curve, and what that means is we're essentially cutting little pie-shaped triangles out of the curve in the seam allowance of our flap, and this is going to eliminate bulk so that when we turn this right side out and press it, we get like a nice smooth curved edge rather than a bunchy edge, if that makes sense. Then you'll just flip it right side out and give it a good press. Then you'll take it over to your sewing machine and you're going to top stitch around that curved edge, and the right side of your flap is the side that you put the mark on, also the interfaced side, so that's going to be facing up. You'll just sew 1/8 of an inch from the edge going around the curve. Now we grab our front piece with our pocket and we're going to baste the flap in place as well. So matching the notches on that top edge, you're going to baste across the top using a 1/4 inch seam allowance, and you'll want to make sure that the right side of your flap is facing up. Something I forgot to mention earlier is that if you are doing a button and a buttonhole on your bag, then you would have sewn the buttonhole onto your flap before you joined it to your front piece. But I am going to be doing snaps, so I'm doing it at this point, just because it's easier to do the top and bottom snaps all at once. So I have this great snap plier set that I love. It's from Dritz, this is it. And then I have these heavy duty snaps that are 5/8 of an inch, and they just seem to be kind of a good all-purpose snap for me. And then you'll just follow the instructions on whatever snap plier thing, or if you're sewing a button on, you'll do that on the pocket here. If you would like to see a more in-depth video on these snap pliers, I could definitely do that. I've been using them constantly lately. So now we'll attach the zipper, and first you want to find the center point on your zipper. So I'm just folding it in half and making a mark on the tape with a pen. You won't see the tape later, so with the right side of your bag facing up, you're going to lay your zipper face down on the front of your bag, and I'm matching that mark up with this notch at the top of my front piece. And then you want to pin the excess zipper tape up and out of the way. You can zip your zipper up and down as you're sewing this to move the head out of the way, because it's hard to maneuver around the head. So just pin that excess zipper tape up out of the way. And then we're just going to baste this in place using a 1/4 inch seam allowance. Next we'll add the lining. So right sides together, we're going to pin our lining to our front piece, matching notches, and the zipper will be sandwiched in the middle. I forgot to film that, so this is kind of an awkward transition, but you'll sew that using a 3/8 inch seam allowance. So your zipper is sandwiched between your front and your lining, and here that is. After you sew it, you will press your lining up and away, and then we're going to understitch the zipper tape seam allowance to the lining. Here's that done, and then we're just going to press the lining down so that the lining and the front are kind of sitting on top of each other. Next up, we kind of repeat that process using the back piece. So we're going to lay the zipper face down on the back piece, matching up that center point with the notch at the top of our back. And then we baste that in place using our 1/4 inch seam allowance and keeping those the ends of the zipper tapes out of the way. And then we're adding the lining. So right sides together, we're pinning the lining to the back with the zipper sandwiched in the middle, and then you'll sew it with a 3/8 inch seam allowance. Press it, press the seam allowance towards the lining, and then understitch again. And I think I mentioned this earlier, but just keep in mind that when you're sewing these seams, the zipper head is going to be in your way and it's annoying, but you can move it around as you're sewing. So if you need to move the zipper head out of your way, you can lower your needle, lift your presser foot, and then pull the zipper away from where you are sewing. And that's just a really helpful thing to know when sewing with a little zipper like this. So here's our cute bag so far. In this next step, we are joining front to back and lining to lining. So first step, unzip your zipper, because if it's zipped all the way, when you go to turn your bag right side out, you're gonna be so bummed. Open up your bag so that your linings are sitting on top of each other and your front and back are sitting on top of each other. You're gonna sew around the perimeter of this essentially square, rectangle? It's a rectangle, I don't know. Anyway, you will match up the seams and the understitching, just making sure these side parts are perfect, and then you can pin around the rest of the perimeter. You'll leave an opening at the base of the lining because we're going to pull the bag right side out through the lining. So around the front and the back, right sides together, and then the sides and part of the bottom of the lining. You'll sew this with a 3/8 inch seam allowance on 3 of the sides. So both of the side seams and the base of the front to back side. On the base of the bottom where the linings are being sewn together, you can actually use a 1/2 inch seam allowance, and that just gives a little bit more space inside of your bag when you trim it away so that it can sit nicer. So you'll sew again, leaving a little 2-inch opening down at the base around the perimeter of your bag. Here's our bag so far. We'll clip the corners, not clipping through the seam allowance here, but we're just reducing bulk in the corners. And then you can trim the seam allowance on the base of the lining a little bit. And then we will pull this right side out through that little opening, and we'll squeeze all the corners into place and give it a really good press. And here she is. Next, we are going to pull the lining up and we're going to close that little opening. So you'll just fold that edge under and you can pin it in place, and then you'll just sew about 1/8 of an inch from that little folded edge, and you want to back stitch at the beginning and the end. Then you can stuff that lining back down into the bag, and there you have it. And then you can just slide this onto the belt through those loops, and you can wear it on the side or the back or whatever you want. Here is the finished skirt in all of its glory. I made a little matching bralette, and I used, it's a hack from the Marcel dress by Chalk and Notch Patterns. It's a really cool pattern, I'll link it below, but I just basically cropped it off below the chest and added a little elastic waistband. But yeah, I think this is a really fun little matching set that I could wear like to the beach or whatever. And I hope this sew along was fun and helpful. And yeah, let us know if you have any questions in the comments down below, and we'll sew again soon.